So Anette is a professor of landscape architecture, history theory, and design at Rutgers University. She is an award-winning scholar, an educator, and a critic. She's a graduate of the University of Vienna and the, as I learned, ETH, or ETH, in Zurich, a wonderful, wonderful university. Her research focuses on designed landscapes from the 19th century to the contemporary practice, with a particular focus on topology and phenomenology. In 2019, she co-founded the Arts Integration Research Collaborative, AIR, which I've learned about and I'm going to mention in another minute, which prioritizes creative placemaking to foster spatial justice through multidisciplinary research and curricular agendas that benefit and strengthen local communities around Rutgers. Anette Freytag's books have been honored with the J.B. Jackson Book Prize, the European Garden Book Award, the DAM Architectural Book Award, and many more. And I just want to show you, I received a lovely copy of one of her most recent works, which is on the landscapes of Dieter Kienast, who really, I remember from your lecture, was one of the major figures in bringing design into an ecological context. And hopefully that's pretty close to what it was.
Yeah, totally.
And did not live a particularly long life, as I recall.
No.
Yeah. But these magnificent books that she's published are one side of the scholar, but what I think is also so important is that the other side of the scholar is out there in the real world testing ideas and making an impact on other people. And just recently, she completed with her students and with her AIR collective the Rutgers Universal Access Garden Pilot. Done really on a shoestring, it's a reminder that creativity starts with ideas, and if you have $10, you can make it happen with $10. It was not 10, but it's a magnificent, I think there's some brochures in the back for people in the room. I would encourage you. The website, I've actually been mesmerized by looking at sort of the vibrant sort of ideas, the walks that have been undertaken from the campus to the gardens, involving dance, collaboration around art, and of course this incredible interface of becoming aware of plants and seeing them. So I'd say without further ado, Annette, thank you for being so patient with us. I apologize for this, but we should have the backup computer shortly.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you all for staying with us. Let's hope it will resolve. So good evening to the audience here at the Arnold Arboretum and to the audience online. I wish to thank you, Annette, the director of the Arnold Arboretum, Anette Freytag, further the director of research facilitation, Faye Rosine, the chief of staff, Maureen Hickey, and last but not least, events coordinators Nikita Mahulka and Sarah Neckerman for inviting me to a temporary research residence at this wonderful institution and to deliver this lecture. It is the last stop and the highlight of my research sabbatical, and I could not have been luckier than to end it in beauty, finir en beauté, like the French say. Walking the grounds every day with endless discoveries, thank you so much. From this place of joy, I would like to share recent theoretical and preservation work, as well as community-engaged spatial justice project where I work with arts integration research. The goal of all of my work is to enhance well-being by form giving, by respect for living organisms, and by the creation of meaningful relationships in space, in discourse, and within communities. I define well-being as a psychological, but also as a physical property. Thus, well-being includes the care for other living beings who together form a living environment with humans. This is what I define as community, and this brings me directly to the Arnold Arboretum. So on my first day of my visit, I was lucky enough to be invited to a lecture by Director Anette Freytag, where he talked about 150 years of exceptional scholarship and collections at the Arnold Arboretum. I was deeply moved how he, a professor of organismic and evolutionary biology, cared about us creating a meaningful relationship with trees. With his pocket camera, Anette Freytag has taken 14,000 photos during his regular walks. In the many director's posts, he tells the stories of the trees that are providing a seasonal attraction, like now the mountain laurels. This is a beautiful way to stimulate curiosity and make people want to come out and learn about living organisms. I will show you some of the marvelous findings I had during my walks in the past week. What do these discoveries bring? Joy. I loved how Ned, the scientist, stressed in his lecture that the work of the Arboretum is to keep all of its species alive and safe, to conserve and enhance the biodiversity, but also to help the visitors of the Arnold Arboretum build love by loving the living organisms that they meet. It is unconditional love without expectation of reciprocity, because I can tell you these locust trees really sting heavily. So the love learning through the joy we have in observing, touching, and also smelling, the plants really increases our humanity. And here you see the magnificent big leaf magnolia, and I think if I will be reborn as a tree, I think this will be it. And so this is exactly where I'm also going when I highlight the importance of the concept of biophilia for a reimagining of landscape architecture, which is one of the disciplines that gives form to our surrounding environments. And I want to discuss this form giving through the concept of topology. Topology is about design to enhance well-being. The Arnold Arboretum has been designed by some of the finest landscape architects in history, men and women alike, and the plants that we admire in it are carefully staged through a thought-out topography, pathways, vistas, side axes, ponds, vantage points, you name it. So before I get to biophilia and topology in more detail, let me briefly talk about how they contribute to spatial justice. Obviously, this dual approach to urban green spaces, be it parks, gardens, arboretums, promenades, playgrounds, must lead to advocating for free access to nature for all. I was so happy back in 2020 to read the op-ed, "Keep Parks Open." The Arnold Arboretum set a trend for the entire United States. During my stay, I learned that the Arboretum is dedicated to get a more diverse audience to the grounds, building an elevated boardwalk to bridge to the underserved neighborhood at the south side. This neighborhood is cut off from the Arboretum by a train line and a busy, dangerous street without sidewalks. And it should increase diversity, because like so many of the great American collections and parks, the lands of the Arboretum have been bought and then bequeathed due to the fortune that has been amassed from trade in goods produced by enslaved persons. To open up, the Arboretum is working with art groups, community groups, and of course, especially educators to also maximize the number of children who are forging their relationship to living organisms at a very young age. Exactly the same aspirations drove Julia Ritter and myself to found the Arts Integration Research, or AIR Collaborative, at Rutgers University in 2019. Julia is a choreographer and a dancer. I'm a landscape architecture historian and theorist, especially interested in walking and thus in phenomenology and topology. Walking is the simplest form of creating dance, of organizing time, of organizing movement in time and space. Our acronym AIR points to the fact that all of our projects are outdoors and that our mission is to increase spatial justice by working towards access to nature for all. Rutgers Gardens are our urban biodiversity hotspot, comprising 100 acres of land and featuring designed gardens, plant collections, experimental fields, woods, natural habitats, a student's farm, and a farmer's market. This valuable resource for students and residents is cut off from campus through US Route 1 and Riders Lane, and you can only access it by car. So there are no pathways, there are no buses, there are no bike lines. This sounds familiar to what you have on the south side too. With the March to Rutgers Gardens, we showed the community a way how to walk there, and the spoiler alert is that you have to pass a cow tunnel to do so. 500 people joined us in September 2021 for a choreographed 2-mile walk from Cook Douglas campus to Rutgers Gardens. We started with a danced land acknowledgement, then encountered live performances of Fluxus events. You have to know that this was here on Skelly Field. You have to know that Fluxus, this international art movement, had its really core at Rutgers, at the Douglas College. And then this was followed by animated storytelling, music, and dance. It was also a welcome back celebration in the middle of the pandemic. We had many testimonies on how people felt so relieved to be together again after 18 months of isolation and how they enjoyed being part of a thriving community. By walking across the Cook Research Farm and passing the cow tunnel under US 1 to reach the gardens, the participants acknowledged their desire for access to recreational space while discovering and celebrating the many resources and diverse grounds of Rutgers University. What arts integration research produces serves as a conduit for knowledge in our daily life, beyond the traditional academic sense of knowledge absorption. Because we learn about our communities by walking them, by talking with our neighbors, by interacting with the layers of space, sound, and people beneath our daily roots. Building on local histories and landscapes, the AIR Collaborative aims to create opportunities for people of all abilities to engage with the spaces around them. And you already heard, we have just opened a pilot garden for people with disability, with raised beds for people in wheelchairs, or people that cannot bend. This pilot was designed and built by landscape architecture students with a budget of only $10,000 for materials, soil, plants, adaptive tools, and signage. So it's programmed for and undertaken by people with disabilities, and right now the clients of the Rutgers Autism Center work there every day. We also have this area for service dogs where they don't hurt their paws because it's mulch. The other is on a parking lot. We need to, really change parking lots into living places. So as Ned said, we have this little pamphlet out there if you want to have a look, and also have a look at our website, the AIR Collaborative Net. So how about learning? All AIR Collaborative projects provide students with experiential learning. The pilot garden was designed and built by 28 landscape architecture students under the guidance of my colleagues Vincent Chavet and Jan Hahn in the Construction 2 course with guest lectures and critiques from people with disabilities. But arts integration is not only exploring new ways of learning, it's also investigating new ways how to communicate research from the sciences and humanities to a non-academic public. Topics are access, biodiversity, global warming, migration, nutrition, or food insecurity. We use choreography, storytelling, graphic design, music performances, or small urban design intervention to bring messages across. I would like to play you a video. I hope that this is going to work. Of a composition and sound installation by my colleague Scott Ordway, performed by the altos and sopranos of the Rutgers For He's Choir under direction of Brandon Williams that you see here in the front. The singers were positioned in this now out-of-use cow tunnel under US 1, which, as you have heard, is the missing link of a new connection between the campus and the gardens. But US 1 does not only cut off people from Rutgers Gardens, it also cuts through a part of the lower Raritan watershed. So together with my colleague Lina Struve, a biologist and watershed activist Hedda Phoenig, we put together the names of living organisms in the site-specific habitats of water, earth, and air. Here you see the first page of Scott's score and one list of the chosen species. While diving into the tunnel, the walkers heard the names of species that have disappeared. While coming out of the tunnel, they heard chants of the names of species that have newly emerged, because life is dynamic. A flyer with an explanation on the sound installation and the lists of all the chanted names in Latin with translation into English and Spanish, because New Brunswick has mainly a Spanish community, was handed to the walkers at the exit. And this video reinforces how we are also with arts integration touching the realms of biophilia and topology for spatial justice. Topology at this time in its mathematical sense of a critical structure of moments of separation and connections in a space. So let's hope you can enjoy this. Otherwise, we switch to the Google Drive. Try again. So I think you get the feeling. So Sarah says if this is a good moment to stop, she would make the Google Drive work and continue the lecture without flickering from here. But I think you understood that, and you can look at this video again from the website, that this really brings you into a very special emotion and mood. And it was also a way, this cow tunnel, that is really a place where you don't feel very comfortable. You don't want to go, but it makes it a real adventure. And you always, when you pass it from now on, and you have seen it with the singers, and you have heard it and experienced it, you will never forget it. It will always be a changed place. So we also see this arts integration research and these performances as something where we can activate spaces that are uncomfortable and that you change them. You really create them into something else. And then, you know, you have the path, and people were just coming out of the tunnel in this like really strong light. And then we had all the dancers from Kolab, who are all dancers with people of color, dancing and, you know, giving an acknowledgement to the exploited workers in the fields, over generations and generations. And this was a movement choir. So we came from the singing into a movement choir, and no one ever had passed these lands. So it was a complete discovery. Even people who worked for 30 years at Rutgers have never passed this threshold and have this possibility to go to the gardens. So that was the strength of this project. And it's a good moment to stop, because now I'm going to explain in detail topology and biophilia. And while Sarah is setting this up, do you need help, or are you able to do it? So she said, if to bridge it, I can also take some questions right now if you would like to hear more about it. And then I'm going to dive back into topology and biophilia, and it will be a nice ending also with what you are doing at the Arboretum. So do you have questions now, right away? Yes, please.
The people who participated, the walkers?
Yeah? Yeah.
The walkers who participated?
Yeah.
Who were they? Where did they come from? And what kind of feedback did you get?
Yeah, so they were mainly from the Rutgers community. You see they still all wear their masks. We had to be masked inside. This was in September 2021. We came back on campus after 18 months. We also had really luck because the weather was so beautiful. But they said, sometimes it's really frustrating to be in an institution, any institution, for years and years. And they just said they were so appreciative. It was revived. They saw, oh my God, we have a theater group, we have a singer, we have a marching band, we have these grounds, we have a farm, we have these gardens. It was really, that what is so important for me in topology, this connecting of people, connecting of spaces, connecting of layers of meaning, that was very strong. And then, Rutgers had this 250th anniversary only in 2016. And so they had the Scarlet and Black project. For the first time, they were, really thinking about their land grant history with Native American. It was one of the land grabs that is so eminent, of public universities that happened here. But then also, how did they build on enslaved labor? And so this project was coming strong, and we had a marker at one of the houses. Then we had this Cliff Matthias coming in, and he asked us to really dance in a circle, which made everyone extremely uncomfortable. But it was also the beginning of a community building. It was the beginning of the march. Once you really went with the, and he said, we have to acknowledge the earth. And, everyone was like, I hope no one is seeing me. Is my dean here? What's going to happen? Then it was okay. And people were relieved. So there was a lot of joy and happiness, And it is about this access to nature, to these spaces, and to discover them. So yeah, they were absolutely raving. They're asking us to do it every year, but I could only do that and become an events manager. And I said I'm only doing it again when they have built the bridge and have the path, because then we worked with the engineering students, made a capstone project out of it. So they designed the bridge over Riders Lane, an ADA accessible bridge. How could this look like? And so these are the moments that we did in this work. Okay, Sarah, how many minutes do you think you need? Yeah, all set. Excellent. Then, so where do I come from here? Can I put in this? Oh, excellent. So I'm not going to play this again another time, because, but really you can have a look on the website, and then you will also see the actors. So the actors, you saw them briefly. They performed the stories of the natural world. So it was all about biodiversity, and we had a flood 3 weeks before this event happened, a terrible flood, And so it was all about what is the water saying, what is the act of the water saying, what does it mean? You and I are one, they said. I'm part, the water is part of me, I'm part of the water, but we gotten out of control. And this is this idea of let's communicate the findings of science in a way that also a broader public understands. Okay, so yeah, we go at it. So topology. So what exactly is topology in landscape architecture? And I fear we are also flickering here, but let's see. Sorry, and my manuscript is here. So that's, I have to say, that's one of the more challenging lectures that I gave in the last years. Okay, so topology represents a theoretical framework as well as a pedagogy on how to use different tools to recast the potential of landscape architecture for a better practice. Topology summons up the work of changing and evolving teams of about 30 different people that have worked with the French landscape architect Christophe Giraud, sitting here, during his 20-year-long tenure as professor of landscape architecture at the ETH Zurich, or ETH. It's also known as the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, or we love to call it the MIT of Europe. So I have worked with Christophe between 2005 and 2015. And in 2011, when I became his head of research, we started conceptualizing what these teams have produced or were going to produce in research and teaching, and named the approach topology. Here you see the cover of our first publication of 2012 that displayed the theoretical framework. Afterwards, the body of work was presented in various book chapters, in symposia, conferences, and in exhibitions. One of them you see here in 2022. And what you see on the screen is a point cloud model of 44 miles of Swiss Gotthard landscape and the 35 miles long railway tunnel that cut through the Gotthard mountain massif. So this was presented to discuss the potential of point cloud models for engineering, spatial planning, landscape architecture, and architecture. You have to understand that this means 44 miles of alpine landscape scanned with terrestrial laser scanners and represented as a three-dimensional point cloud model. This means that you can get a section at every moment of these 44 miles. A section means you cut through the landscape, here represented as a model. You see the infrastructure, you see the tunnel, you see the mountain, you see the streets, you see everything, the topography and the topology, and you can, orient yourself with unprecedented precision. So this is really, the section in itself is where the important information of terrain lies. It's the bread and butter of any designer working with landscape. Topology is always about being in the landscape and designing from there, be it in the point cloud model or exposing oneself to the elements and sounds of the landscape. Here you see impressions of the wonderful conference on sonic topology last June. It took place at the Old Botanical Garden in Zurich and literally in Lake Zurich. So please check out the film and the sound archives of this team, of my excellent, the excellent work of my former colleagues, like Ludwig Berger, or here Nadine Schütz. She's now working at the IRCAM in Paris, and also their guests. So in the topology framework, landscape architecture is understood as an integrative discipline with a deeply rooted tradition in shaping and preserving nature. The goal of establishing a topological thinking is to merge ecological concerns and design approach that considers the basic factors of modeling a site. The understanding of both the terrain and the history of a place, its spatial qualities, the conditions of its soil, the proper use of plants and building materials, and the adjustments to the expectation of its users while challenging aesthetic sensitivities. To this end, the teams that have worked with Christophe Giraud developed a pedagogy with field instruments of research and design to rethink landscape architecture education and practice. They're using point cloud models, UAV-generated landscape analysis, CNC milled models, sandboxes, video cameras, microphones, and of course, the good old sketchbook. I have contributed with history and theory in co-writing the theoretical framework, and of course, in identifying the topologists of the 19th and 20th century, like Fred Eicher or Dieter Kienast. Together with Christoph, we will start working on a landscape topology manual, now that he's retired, to make this work better known and also to explain its mission. A core assumption of topology is that form is central to our physical and mental well-being. Throughout the history of humans shaping their environment, we have to consider the terrain from the large scale of natural and cultivated landscapes to small-scale gardens. We have to include people's understanding of nature and their attitude towards nature, which is very important for the way landscapes and gardens have been designed. My core assumption of form giving is that our environment has been shaped over time in a way that form, function, and meaning go together. They cannot be dissociated from each other. Agricultural practices, forestry, fishing, hunting, other practices result in giving form to landscapes. This is what I qualify as function. Spiritual practices, traditions, cultural values also shape landscape form. This is what I qualify as meaning. With the aim to inform future designers and stewards of the land, my landscape history course identifies what form seems to have harmoniously and naturally come out of a landscape or seem to be embedded in it. Forms that make a landscape or an urban site legible. In his teachings, Christoph Schiro identifies two archetypes of landscape architecture. First, the forest clearing, a negative form that guaranteed survival in the formerly woody landscapes of the north. Forest clearings provide opportunities for hunting and agriculture, and many ancient spiritual places of the north have also been circular. Secondly, the wallet garden as archetype that emerged from deserts in the landscape of the south. It is a positive form within a void stemming from the oasis. Irrigation and drainage techniques come with this archetype. The spiritual connotation is the paradise garden that many cultures know in different ways. For Giraud, these archetypes make up the DNA of landscape architecture, and he claims that there is a kind of intelligence of the terrain. By this he means a knowledge of shaping the land according to local conditions of terrain, soil, plants, exchange of techniques. This also regards the choice of materials, including plants, as well as beliefs and actions that have been passed on over thousands of years. I follow him in this thought and have added a third archetype, infrastructure, network, connections, which exist as long as places exist. In the best case, they make landscapes visible and comprehensible. On the large scale, topological ideas have been clearly at play in the 19th century with the regional plannings of Peter Joseph Lenné in Germany or Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted in the United States. They bestow through a system thinking of design intervention that is interlinked with a small-scale thinking. A historical reference of these tasks would be Peter Joseph Lenné's plan to beautify the region of Potsdam. He established connections between the town, the large existing princely gardens, and the agricultural and residential areas. He also integrated infrastructure, such as streets and railways, into a meaningful whole. What I mean by meaningful whole is that the different areas were brought into a relationship with one another through modeling the terrain, planting avenues, creating a well-thought-out system of streets and paths, and through distinct sightlines. American urban planners later used these examples as an inspiration for their projects. For example, Buffalo. The first American city to implement an interconnected park system was Buffalo, New York, and it was designed by Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted. Vaux was hired by H.E. Downing from England, and Olmsted had traveled to Europe before becoming a landscape architect. For the United States, they transformed the form of the European models to serving a democratic society. For example, Olmsted's vision of a parkway was not oriented towards providing a stage for the spectacle of the bourgeoisie, like it was the case in Unter den Linden in Berlin or at the Champs-Élysées in Paris. No, it was oriented through a democratic space and access to all. It was a tree-lined system of connections within a park system that organically combined the designed natural environment with a built environment. The example of Buffalo with 9 parkways was widely published and echoed back to Europe, where Olmsted's parkways influenced the remodeling of Hungarian cities like Szeged or Budapest, amongst others. Luca Schepeli-Knorr has shown how Olmsted parkways in Buffalo appeared in professional journals in Hungary around 1900. You see this here. An unknown author who traveled to North America illustrated these travelogues with plans, photos, and self-drawn cross-section, as well as detailed descriptions of the different types of lane traffic and the overall functionality. The author also provided meticulous descriptions of the plants, trees, and shrubs and examined the maintenance problems. The author was fascinated by the tram rail set in grass that allowed pedestrians to walk in this area and therefore avoid vehicular roads. The point is, these landscape architects thought the scales together, and his thinking has been destroyed. This is where topology comes in. You have a lot of good examples here in Boston, and then also the same problems as everywhere in the United States, because a lot has been destroyed in the time of urban renewal and modernization. So I show you a stretch of the Charles River with Memorial Drive on one side and the Soldiers Fields Road on the other. And like in almost every American city, these kind of roads cut off the neighborhood from the waterfront. It's the same in New Brunswick, it's the same in Buffalo, it's like everywhere. You know, basically these really beautiful parts where you can go to the waterfront, also what Olmsted wanted. In Buffalo and in Boston, you can't go over these roads anymore. So Memorial Drive, where I learned last Sunday, was closed down during the pandemic. It holds for Sundays still. But now what's going to happen is, which seems in first place a good thing, they are going to limit traffic to 2 lanes and close down the 2 other lanes. However, and I'm saying this from a point of, you know, this is, I didn't take a picture, unfortunately, because we have been measuring, you know, the part of the shoreline between Memorial Drive and then the shore and the river. And this is a playground that my friend Pat Seckler initiated in 1981. It's in between roads. This is Memorial Driveway. And basically what they are doing is they are closing down the roads, but they are letting cyclists and pedestrians use the same room. Remember what Olmsted did and what the Hungarian people loved, that he had these different sections for pedestrians, vehicles, trams. And then they all are in the same space. And to give more space, they are taking away 6 + 11 feet from the already teeny tiny, you know, stretch of green that is a beautiful, gentle slope to the river, cut it in half. This is not working, so they have to regrade it. It will be a lookout platform, and it's destroyed. And it's a death sentence for old people and for children, because even if they want to walk in a straight line, they can't. They cannot possibly walk in a straight line. They learn how to bike and to scooter, and you know these cyclists with what speed they come. So it's a complete stupid proposal. I'm very sorry to say this. And it's a proposal where no landscape architect with any clue of landscape architecture history or of anything that Olmsted gave as a legacy to the United States and Calvert Walks in Buffalo or here has ever looked into, you know? So this is the reason why I really believe we need history and we need to know these things for the current situation. So, change in perspectives. We need a change in perspectives on 3 scales. When we talk about developing the city from the landscape today, That does not simply mean respecting at least the geological and topographical form, but also dealing with the ecosystem and the living, the fauna and the flora. Every design intervention has to be thought from the living environments at 3 scales and has to put them into a relationship: the territory, the public space, the garden, and the plant. Any act of planning, architecture, any construction of a new infrastructure should take landscape thinking into consideration. The planning of the large territory should not forget the small scale and vice versa. We must adopt an attitude where the focus is on the relationship between the whole and the detail. When did we lose this topological attitude? I would say between the late 1930s and the 1960s, when cities were reorganized with mass urbanization, urban renewal, and car friendliness, and every material was at disposal. The time when we have lost the knowledge to shape our environments intelligently and intelligibly was also the time when we lost the geranium. The landscape historian Eric de Jong, who introduced me to the concept of biophilia, starts his long essay on how biophilia can transform our environment from windowsill to landscape with the Dutch sentence, achter die geraniums. This was a way of Dutch urbanists to dismiss the care for living beings and for details. And you have just seen this in the context of Memorial Drive and Riverbend Park. In the portrait that Rembrandt Peale painted of his brother Rubens Peale in Philadelphia in 1801, he highlighted above all the geranium and the love that he and his brother shared for this plant. We clearly see the intimate relationship between man and plant. In the American context, this evokes the practice of Native Americans who establish a deep relationship with a plant before picking it. In Dutch, the expression, take care of the geraniums, is a figurative phrase which from 1937 on received a negative connotation. Caring for geraniums means dealing with superfluous, unnecessary, and troublesome details. The assumption is that you don't learn anything from a geranium. The change in appreciation appeared in parallel with a change in the perception of nature in modern times. Nature was no longer the geranium, but air, light, space, and recreation. De Jong decries the ignorance of human culture with regard to plants. This is not surprising because obviously they do not fit into our current society. They are not supermobile and flexible. They need care and constancy. They are bound to the soil and to a place. They need a quiet life and time to grow. Plants are indeed ultra-conservative. And through the essence of their lives, plants contradict the idea of a controllable environment. It seems that for these reasons, that in the urban realm, landscape architects have become increasingly hesitant of dealing with plants as materials because they resist all economic and social conditions. Instead, landscape architects have developed a liking for the use of inorganic materials when designing open space in the city. So it might be no coincidence that I show you a country estate, La Gara, to redive into the topic of biophilia. These pictures are part of a book I edited on the revival of the estate of La Gara with the restoration of the orchard that dates back to the 17th century. So this is the orchard, 17th century. A new berry vegetable flower garden, as well as a series of ornamental gardens by the landscape architect Eric Dond. The revival of the 100-acre large estate that also comprises a small winery and agricultural fields was accompanied by the restoration of the surrounding landscape and wetlands. The owners have chosen a holistic and collaborative approach to restoration and development. All collaborators have taken into account the coexistence and the living together of plants, animals, and humans. The result was, for example, that lost species have reappeared, such as the elm. The gardens are also home to many animals, birds, butterflies, reptiles, insects. The goal of the authors that contributed to the edited volume, practitioners and historians alike, was to provide a case study to explore through the prism of one estate how to overcome disciplinary boundaries in caring for one landscape. Usually is it this: here's the designer, there's the nature conservationist, here's the wetland manager, there's the horticulturalist, here's the craftsman, there's the biologist. But we wanted to show how they all work together to design with nature and at the same time to preserve an ecosystem that comprises different living organisms, plants, animals, and humans. Eric de Jong, and I come to my end, wrote the introduction to this book, and there he states, I quote, "As a metamorphosis of both nature and culture, a new reality comes into being. The garden and the park as integral living entity that may include the diversity of life forms, ranging from the wild to the artificial, from the ornamental to the fruitful landscape. Through the principle of biophilia, that aesthetic may engage us closely with all aspects of the plants, trees, fruits, ecological processes, landscape, earth, geology, water, and sky, and with the wildlife, insects, and bacteria that are part of, as well as their use of intervention by humans. Through such engagement, we understand not only nature and nature's processes, but also our relationship to that world, to ourselves, and to our own culture." End of quote. This beautifully ties back to where we have started. I hope I was able to make clear how topology and biophilia lead to an advocacy for spatial justice, how they teach us awareness for the character of landscape that we find before designing them, as well as a humility and accountability towards living environments. In a state of emergency, topology and biophilia rather plead for a slowing down. In the end, they are lifestyles, and they can accompany growth or decline. Which of these two options we will have to choose, time will tell. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a magnificent presentation. Would you be willing to take some questions?
Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you for your patience with the technical problems. Yeah.
We asked everyone to please speak into the mic because that's the way the online audience is able to hear us.
Thank you, indeed. I was curious, particularly towards the end, and I think some of the images of these designed landscapes in urban contexts, and those beautiful sort of ruderal photographs towards the end. If you would talk a little bit about how the plants are invited to participate in this design program of biophilia. I mean, what are their energies lending to this, and what kind of inspiration do they provide? Not only in their immediate apprehension of them, but the way they organize space, the way they organize our senses.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Yeah, I have to say, so my first big study was the work of Kinast, and he loved spontaneous vegetation. So he studied in Kassel, where spontaneous vegetation came out of the debris of the bombed cities, and it completely reinformed the aesthetic of designing in the urban. Because you are right, there is a little bit of might be a confusion. I mean, we have the arboretum that is a collection, and you have this wonderful moment together. Then you have a country estate, but then you also have the city. You have different scales. So how do you manage this? So I talked a lot about this legibility and intelligibility. And so what I was so fascinated in this work that Kinast did and others, and we are talking about the 1970s, 60s, and 70s, they were studying the plants that came without being asked, this ruderal spontaneous vegetation. And they took them as a guidance, first of all, to learn what plant wants to survive there, and then also to change an aesthetics for working with nature in the city. Because before that, it was either the gardenesque or a rural image plastered into the city. And I found really a way, what is the language of nature in the city? And so I would say this is the agency that the plants have. But from this place, Kinas became a very formal designer. But he had his very strict forms really anchored in the terrain. And this is why I think that landscape architects, and I have to say any discipline that is working with landscape, should really understand the places, and they can understand it by the plants that are present. So you will also hear from me that I'm really an advocate for novel ecologies also, that I would say, it's a very harsh topic, and I'm not ideological in any way, but we have a climate change. There are some plants that are better suited in the urban realm to survive. We should really go with what is coming, I would say, instead of fighting it. It depends, of course, But I would say this is the agency, and then I really believe, of course, Lagara, this is, an agricultural landscape, horticultural landscape, the perennials and all, they were planted. But then there is this moment of interaction, and it changes you. Being in the garden changes you. And this is why I changed my entire lecture after your lecture, because I was really thrilled to hear this from a scientist, as I said, or organismic biologists, evolutionary biologists, to say we need love, we need joy. When do you hear this in academia? And this is what we need. This is why I think, I really believe that people will not change their ways through the environment by all the horrific data and the stories and all they hear. They will do it if they care, And this is what I would also say, this is the agency of the plants, that they make us start caring. And I presented part of this in the Collège de France, in the Academy of Sciences in Paris, with architects. They were talking about AI and geoengineering and things. And of course, I was looking like the naive gardener, but I really believe that this is more powerful as going for the permafrost in Alaska or something, Because if we go into the cars to get cool because we are escaping the heat, this is not going to help, So I hope this answers your question. Yeah. Thank you very much. So you had a question, and then Rosetta had one.
So I was thinking, one of the things about plants is that they grow, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
They're sort of. So I'm thinking about trying to go after one of these projects, and you have an idea of the plants in the landscape, but then there's this temporal dimension that you have to have this vision into the future, and so how do you think about that? How do you think about how plants change?
I think that's the beauty too, and this is about this humility also. First of all, I think, politicians think in periods of when they are voted in, but they have to think in generations. I showed you one theater in Aarhus by Sørensen when I talked about the archetype of the clearing. Sørensen planted the oaks, and he knew he would be dead when they would be really beautiful. So we are doing things we know we will not live when this is beautiful. But we have to accept this. And I think this is the thing about the growing of the plants, that we do something for generations and generations afterwards. And I think politicians could learn, because they cannot do it in a budgetary cycle. We cannot, we have to think in these long stretches of time. And so the bonsais, some of them, they were grown in 1737. So I know they will all be there in this pavilion. I will be long gone, and someone else will be happy to see it. Yeah. So I think this whole idea of growth, and this is also the fear very often of landscape architects. They want to work with ready-made plants, with instant, and think about the for example, the wood in the National Library in France, they digged out an entire piece, stretch of wood. It was a beautiful engineering site, but they flew all the trees into the library because they couldn't wait for them to grow, because you are afraid of your own passing, but you shouldn't be. You should be grateful for the time you are here, and then just say, yeah, I learned from the tree that this is for in 300 years or something. Rosetta, yeah.
Thanks, Annette, so much. Oh, no. Yes. I have so many questions, and they're all swirling around, and so I'm going to try to make something come out that's articulate right now. But I'll just say that Annette and I have known each other for a long time, and it's really nice to have you here at the Arboretum. But as a landscape architect, and you are a landscape architect as well, or a landscape architectural historian, theorist, but in the field. And I've also lived in Europe, and showing the differences, the cultural differences, really, between a European culture that largely includes landscape architecture in major municipal planning projects as a figure in all planning projects. There is even in Holland, there's the Queen has a landscape architect, for the state. So it is a very respectable and deeply rooted profession in Europe, and it doesn't enjoy the same respect in North America. And you showed us a good example of that. There are no landscape architects involved in the Memorial Drive project. Why? Because they've been relegated to bringing in the mature trees at the end and doing the icing on top, decorating it.
Making it nice.
Yeah, which is absolutely nice. Not what we do, right? Yeah. So, okay, pause. That's just a fact, and it's a cultural difference. It's something I maybe have fought my whole career, or you too. But I've come to feel very much like it isn't. It is a historical fact, and facts don't really change minds, like you're saying, even about So how would you imagine in this extremely engineered society? It's engineering first, right? It's the engineers designing the Memorial Drive, and in control of our cities. And how would you imagine approaching a kind of landscape advocacy, not just for individual projects, or not necessarily through the lens of plants, but for landscape architecture to take a lead role? You would think in Boston with the Emerald Necklace that we would understand the value of that. And yet we do not, right? So even school children, imagine saying to someone in grade 5, do you want to be a park maker? I think they'd go to that career fair, right? So, but they don't even know. Most people I teach at Pratt Institute, I teach graduate students, and most people don't find out about landscape architecture until their 20s or so. I didn't. So it's a very big question to say, how would you address the cultural difference that you've described to us today? And how could we advocate for more landscape architects involved in our planning?
So it's very astounding, because you do have Olmsted, and I mean he did it, and you had Vox, and you had like all the Beatrix Farrand, she took engineering classes to start, and so on and so on. So that's very weird, I mean. In Europe, it changed. I really saw it changing just at my time at the ETH. And then first in the beginning, the architects thought, oh, we have to do landscape. And anyway, we know everything better than anyone else because we are architects. But then there was really a shift of consciousness. And now it is very clear that the landscape architects are leading the teams. This is also why it was so important in the context of the education that they can deal with point cloud models, with CNC milling, that they are up to date with the tools. So first of all, I think they need to be up to date with the tools, which is not the case in our school, for example. I know it's at Harvard, it is at Pratt. But then also to convince the quality that they have. I wonder if it's a question of money, more than of tradition. Because in a way, Olmsted and Vaux, they went to Europe, they saw these like Linné things, and this was still in a princely context, in a bourgeoisie context, very often. And then they brought it to the States, and then it was re-imported to Europe in opening these democratic spaces. Because the first democratic spaces basically came because of the French Revolution, and not everyone wanted their heads to be chopped off. So this is how the English Garden in Munich was opened for the people, as a revolutionary prevention in a way. These are the stories. That was 18th century, late 18th century. But in a way, what all the Europeans that talked about Vaux and Olmsted said is that they bring us these democratic spaces, and then came the 20th century. So in a way, I think that it's really like arguing with Olmsted and these things that would help. I think that the whole landscape urbanism movement was, in the one hand, a good thing in the strategic point, but what they lost was the small scale. They really lost the people and this well-being on the way in being strategic. And I think it must be a mixture of advocacy within the schools, understanding that you have this change of perspective. You cannot treat landscape as a mere resource. The land is on its own, and you have to adapt to the land. It's really this change of perspective that has to be strong. And then I think you also have to be strong in the three scales. And then it's in the schools, it's in the advocacy, it's with the grassroots advocacy. I think that's why the spatial justice work is so interesting and important, because what urban renewal also did, they destroyed the black neighborhoods by cutting through. It's all connected. And it must be a critique of these engineering, architectural, large-scale, regional culture that is completely forgetting the single human being and the single plants. And I think this would be what I would try. We succeeded certainly in European countries, but it really changed a lot, I would say, in the last 15 years. So I would say there's a lot of hope, especially with the bicentennial and these strong fathers and mothers that you have here with Ferrand and Olmsted and so on. It's very weird, It must have to do with something else than the people.
Thank you so much, Annette. That was just so much to think about, and I just want to thank you for actually making that circle back, from a project that begins in a cow underpass on Route 1, connecting people to plants, all the way through to these grand schemes in Europe. But with the reminder that ultimately, what you said, it starts with the plants, the landscape. And it seems to me, from the last question in the comments, in America, we're going in the wrong direction in terms of the relationship. Mm-hmm. And if we don't actually change the actual philosophy and approach, you get the outcomes that you described in Cambridge. Anyway, I want to thank everyone for your attention today. I also want to thank all of you for being so patient with us here at the Arnold Arboretum. Apologize for the problems with our equipment, and I look forward to seeing all of you on the ground soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.